Hello, Louisa. How are you? Anne, how are you? Hey, Han, how are you?
I'm good. This is a gorgeous day outside.
I know, I know, I know. We will at some point head outside, I guess, do this outside.
Well, at the very least, we'll all head outside after this is over
Here you go.
today.
Here you go.
It's quite chilly down here in Washington. I assume it's the same up in New York.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the weather should be really similar to how it is in Washington.
Yeah, I think we're definitely heading into autumn. Well, it's about time. It's November tomorrow, but
I know.
we had a really warm, muggy October and September. That last what was it? Hurricane Zeta
Mhm.
just moved through, which goes to show this was an unusually long hurricane season.
I know. It's crazy too.
Yeah, they got all the way up to the Z's in the names, which is unusual.
Yeah, yeah. It's nice. Yeah. I mean, it's not nice. But, in the West they have those, fires and everything.
Oh yeah, no. We're blessed with a really moderate weather compared to most of the region. Hi, Louisa.
Hello, Anne. How are you?
Fine. And
Hi,
Zach is
hi,
here.
Louisa. How are you?
How are you, Zach? How
Good,
come we
good.
never get to see you, Anne? Do you not have a camera?
And
I'm always on Wi-Fi, like air Wi-Fi, and
Oh,
when I put on the camera, it just freezes up very
does it?
quickly.
Oh, what a shame.
Yeah, but I can hear and see you all, which is great
That's
fun.
good. That's
Yeah.
good.
Hey, Greg. I can log in tomorrow, so you're good. You're off the hook. We have English Revolution. Today we have an interesting presentation. We have Sergio and Aaron presenting, and they're going to be talking about, Aaron is going to talk about Sparta. Sergio is going to do a little reenactment, so it should be a lot of fun.
Reenactment?
Oh, yeah.
Of what?
You'll see. You'll
Oh my
see. It's a
God.
surprise. Sergio
Woo.
is always surprising. And then he's going to talk about women of Sparta, which is interesting.
Oh my
So-
God, that's interesting. That is
I know,
interesting.
Greg, if you heard me, tomorrow you're off the hook. I'm good. I changed my
yeah?
schedule around because I want to
Okay.
hear.
And I was thinking, like, sorry, I forgot that I should have got in a little earlier. But anyway,
no.
good. All right, sure, no problem.
Yeah. Greg always gets excited when Sergio does reenactment, And then Greg goes, Greg goes back into the living room. And is like, okay, I'm gonna put on the Spartans,
No, I'm not
Yeah,
good.
I'm not doing a reenactment of anything. Not my bag. No.
But
I'll talk
but
to you about it.
Sergio is very
Sergio
much
is
into
amazing.
it,
I mean, I still have a picture of Sergio presenting, I think it was something on Greece, and he had a helmet that's
Costumes?
worth.
Oh my God, he had
He had
the
a helmet that was
Yeah.
worth the helmet that was worth $13,000. I shit you
No.
not. He put it on.
Yeah,
And he
Yeah.
put
has
it
all
on?
kinds of weapons and
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
yeah.
That's
He-
very
he-
exciting. It's like going to a museum. God bless him.
Oh,
That's
it was
amazing.
wonderful. I think we all sort of like our mouths dropped, like, oh my God.
Oh my God, a $13,000 helmet. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then he did the one for Al-Andalusia. So he was dressed as a Berber Muslim warrior and the Gothic
Oh, how
warrior.
exciting. I wonder what that looks like. That must be very cool.
Well, I have it on YouTube. So
Do you? Oh, I'll have to look. I'll find it then, Zach. Thank you.
yeah, everything, I record
You're
now,
recording
so-
them all, so you post them on YouTube.
Yeah, because it's then they're lost for posterity. At least people, can now, see. Oh my God, Joe Joyce. So this is gonna be warrior. Joe is the army guy. Hi, Beverly.
Hi,
How are you?
good. How's everybody?
Good, good. Joe, how are you, my friend?
Ryan, how you doing?
Good, good, good.
Let's see.
MB Pilchman. Do we know each other? Maybe we do.
That's my husband.
Oh, okay. How are you? How are you? Nice. Welcome. Welcome. Yeah. Very nice. You guys logging in from a separate phones. Yeah. Just kidding. I have another pair also. They mostly come to the Russian, World War II stuff, and they also log in, from separate phones and their husband and wife. So now we get pairs. So that's awesome.
Okay.
So this is really good. By the way, I've scheduled out, everything for November. So take a look what you like. I have some Teutonic Knights. I have Creation of Israel State.
Looks great.
Yeah, it looks so interesting.
Yeah, I have, we do, literature as well. We're going to be doing Josephus Flavius
Mhm.
and Jewish wars. So I'm going to be presenting that.
Okay.
Then we have a lot of other stuff. And, we have also the educational one. We're going to do, history of money. And we're going to do Forex, and we'll do a little trading, demo trading. So if you guys
that's
are
fun.
interested in a little bit of Forex trading, foreign exchange, we will do that a little bit. I'll post up MP4, and then we'll do a little trading, and hopefully James.
The
James will
Chinese
help.
had the first paper money on the planet. Was the Chinese? I think he'll come on. I think it might have been the. Oh, my brain is not working. I have terrible insomnia. I apologize. But I know the paper money was first in China, and it may have been the Yuan dynasty. It might have been Genghis Khan. I have to look that up.
I see. But the first money, I think, was in Greece.
Probably.
Yeah.
Coins,
So,
right?
yeah,
money.
coins, correct. Yeah.
Greece, I thought
Other than trading
I
shells.
thought it
or
was
Hey.
Darik, the Persian one, the Darik.
Yeah. Well, Pergamon, right? I mean,
Hi,
that's
Mikhail. How are you?
right. Phoenicians.
How are you? I'm reading Dr. Zhivago. What a wonderful book. I
Yeah.
never read that. You read it in Russian, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah.
Dr. Zhivago has an interesting story. You know that he got a Nobel Prize and he never claimed.
Nobel,
Right.
yes, he got a Nobel Prize he never claimed. That's right. I
And
read
because
up
he
on it.
was so pro Stalin, he was afraid to go claim it, and that would be his last days.
Mhm, mhm.
And it was considered to be anti-communist. They won't let us read it in Russia. We weren't allowed to read Dr.
Do they
Zhivago.
read it now, Mikhail?
Yeah.
Yeah,
of course.
it was published in 1990s. I don't remember exact day, but when
It reached Russia in the 90s. Okay. Oh, okay. It was originally published in Italian by an Italian publisher. I looked that up. And then translated to English as well.
Yes, correct. It was an Italian publisher.
Because he was the only one that would publish it, I think, for him.
Yes, correct.
I just looked up a little bit about it because I started reading. I had never, every year I read a classic that got away from me, and this is
Yeah.
mine.
Pasternak was quite a character. And it is
Oh,
so
Aaron.
pro-Soviet Union, and it's weird. Aaron, how are you, my friend?
Good, how's
Hi,
it going?
Marika. How are you?
Hi.
Hi, Marika. Oh, I didn't even notice Marika. Leroy is here. Leroy, what's going on, man?
Hey,
Long time no see.
long time no see. Yeah.
You probably will make your money in the market. There's
Oh my
not
God,
enough
we have
time
so
for
many
you.
kings
I
here.
wish.
We have
Yeah.
Leroy, and we have
Yes.
De Los Reyes, and we have so many kings here today.
Hey, Zach.
Or people who were assigned to kings is probably more accurate, but
I bet that's the truth. I know my people are all peasants.
I think the odds in history are about 99.9%.
99.9, yes. I think a third of all people in ancient Rome were slaves. They got
Yeah,
a good shot at having been a slave.
and they were the advanced people, quote unquote, right? So
yeah.
I think
So you're probably likely not royal.
yeah, I'm not guarantee
So,
that.
Aaron, if you want to share, I mean, we won't start for another couple of minutes, but
Yep.
If you want to share, I just let you share it.
Okay,
Go ahead.
cool. Let me just get.
So today, while Aaron is posting it up, and we have our part of the ancient history, and we're doing history of Sparta. I'll talk, a little bit about Sparta, and Sergey is going to talk, about, like I said, Sparta and women of Sparta. So we're going to, touch on the Agoge Camps, which was their, training camps. And then, as we know, Spartans were extremely, well,
Weird.
well equipped. I'm sorry. What is
No,
it?
no, I was joking. I said extremely weird.
Well, weird too. Yeah, weird too. But they were
no, that's true.
they were awesome.
No, they were awesome. So by the way, I there's a fantastic historian, or yeah, I think she actually is, like, just in terms of academic sense, that was a program that she had. I don't know, it was at least a decade ago, probably 15 years ago. Her name's Bettany Hughes. I think she's from Oxford, either Oxford, Cambridge, something like that. And so I put the link in. And she had this whole series that was on, it was
Helen of Troy? Was it about Helen? I think I
I
know.
mean, that's one of them. I mean, she had a whole series about the ancient world. I want to say it was about 20 different documentaries.
Yeah, she's great. She's great.
Yeah.
She does a lot of stuff for BBC.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's all BBC. So,
Yeah.
but
What's
yeah, I
her
put
name?
Bettany Hughes, like Bittany, and
Okay,
I
thanks.
put the link in. I put the link into the chat. So this was the one
Oh, okay.
I sort of cherry picked a few things, and actually, just like I kind of did a few, I don't know, maybe a month ago, whatever. I'm gonna play just a few minutes of her stuff at the beginning, because I think she just so, because that's her job, real world, just summarizes sort of, the flight pattern as we kind of come in. And so I just want to let you guys know that up front, just so yeah, let me start the share process here. Nice and warm, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Oh man, it's just like
Today, right? You guys prepared candies. There's gonna be a lot of egging going on if you guys don't have candy.
The parade.
I think this
is
year's a
canceled.
thinner
The
year. Let's put
Yeah,
it that way.
the parade is canceled.
Yeah.
First time, probably.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Well, first
Yeah,
time.
every parade is canceled.
Yeah,
So yeah.
It's actually Hallows Eve.
you're right.
It's actually
yes.
Eve of All Saints Day tomorrow.
This is true.
But I think that got lost in the mix in modern times.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, Charlie Brown hijacked it properly. Which I'm
Here you
not-
go. Here you go. Charlie Brown. Exactly.
I have a question. Have this group ever discussed Herodotus
Uh-huh. Yes.
as a formal thing? Okay, I just curious. Since it's the source of so much of this material, it'd just be interesting to hear a few words about, what his view was and how it
Yeah.
affects the history.
But like I said, I mean, if you have something to add, just like I said, you
Yeah,
could
no, I'm just wondering if in the past somebody had discussed that. Yeah.
Yeah, Herodotus, we refer to Herodotus a lot, even though, he's considered to be first historian, but there's a lot of interesting stuff that he said that are not true.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm cranking through my work stuff here. Sorry.
All right, well, leave it. What is this? Well, okay, development, but hold on. Okay, today we're doing the SQL. Okay, no, that's fine.
SQL.
Yeah.
The real world, the stuff that pays me that I can do this for a living. Here, hold on.
Oh, man.
Supports your hobby. You have it.
Yeah, this
Very nice. It's all right.
I got so many decks up for so much stuff here. Hold on. Let's see. Here we go. All right.
Wow.
That's what I wanted.
Wow.
You heard that? Wow.
Yeah, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I am not a Spartan. I mean, look, it is a very
Looks like Halloween.
I'm sorry.
Looks like Halloween.
Oh yeah, no.
We
It's
can go as Spartans.
yeah. And
Well,
obviously-
I don't know why it is, because that's where they lost.
Yeah, that's true. Well, no, so it was about, I mean, I sort of just picked this sort of structure of their society, which to me is really the key to this whole thing, is just understanding, or trying to understand from the sources, which all have a axe to grind and so on, but just what their society was like, and why it produced, or why we think it did, this sort of incredibly intensive culture in not just war making, but in sort of the development of people. There's an echo there. I think somebody's on twice. Maybe.
Please mute.
Ooh. There we go. All right. Who's UCAM?
Can you mute everybody?
Well, we can mute ourselves.
That would be the Spartan thing to do. Spartan humor. All right. So when do you want to get going?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, sure. Am I muted or not? Just let me double check.
No, you're not muted. Go ahead.
Okay, good. All right.
I've muted everybody else except you, even myself.
All right. Well, okay, but at some point you will unmute so they can start to talk and do things, right? All right. All right. So I'm going to start and let me know. Let me do this. I need to see you guys first so I can know you can hear this, and then I can minimize it. Okay, let me know if you hear this just to make sure you can and you can see it, and then I'll make it a large screen. It'll be about maybe 4 or 5 minutes just to hear her talk about sort of the, the flow of how sort of Sparta was and was created, which almost everyone probably here knows, but I'll just do that.
I thought it was the Gerard Butler that from 300.
No, I kind of, but
we all want to see his chiseled
exactly.
physique.
Yes, exactly. Though probably a lot of Spartan training to get there. All right, let me kick this off.
Came to Greece.
Is everyone here?
For not building, for not making things, and for not writing about themselves. Nearly every account we have of the Spartan way of life was written by an outsider, and nearly all had an axe to grind.
Okay. Did you mute that or no?
No, I think it went away.
Oh,
hold on. Let me do it again.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I tried to keep muting and it's not letting me.
Looks like feedback.
Yes, feedback.
1 second.
Feedback.
Here, I muted it. Go ahead.
Okay. Hold on. All right, let me share again.
That was nice.
Yeah, so I just wanted to do that because number one, she in like 4 or 5 minutes explained it, extremely well, and it's and also just to expose you guys if you haven't seen any of her programming, which is I think really fantastic. All right, let me share my presentation now. Just give me a second here.
Yeah, you still have sharing rights.
Okay. Make sure it's sharing. There we go. It should share.
Yeah, it's sharing now. Okay.
Let me go to full. I'm sorry, let me get rid of some of this stuff up here. Drives me crazy. Hide floating control. Okay. And I'm not an expert at Sparta, so for those of you that have more or background, especially in Sparta, please jump in. So these are some of my upfront realities. I will likely butcher some of the Anglified Greek definitions. So if Ralph's here, please jump in as the language monitor. I appreciate that. And I guess let's get going. So what I did is I sort of looked at just doing a little intro, and most of the stuff you can, obviously find out there. Just, how Spartan sort of existence was set up, and then, dive into sort of the, why the army, not what the army did, like so much like battles and any of that, but just kind of the function in the army. and then ultimately we get into how they train, right? So it just sort of integrates, and then the social codes all around all of that, so that you can get some sense of, what we think life was like. I mean, I think we have a pretty decent sense of, um, how unique they were and wanted to be. Um, so this was their, let's just say, system of sort of society and self-governance between the kings, the army, on the left, sort of the relationship of the villages and how they contributed, and then obviously I'll break some of these down, kind of specifically, especially to how the different stages of youth were developed, and how you earned.
All right. Get ready. 10 seconds.
Uh-oh. Is that you doing your workout? So
No, I'm sorry.
that's okay. No worry. It's a family affair. We're all here together. All right. And I'm not going to really go into their foreign policy much or anything, but just as sort of she said, far better than I can. That they basically, they developed this sort of model around their own defense, and how they viewed sort of their place in the region, which of course was elite, and sort of this almost, I would almost say, spiritual relationship to the region and to the people themselves. And I'd say their foreign policy sort of was reasonably consistent with that, which of course made them very warlike. And I'm not gonna really get into this too much, but here, okay. So, and this is sort of the Spartan expansion, which I'm not gonna get into the battles and any of that, just to kind of give you a sense of, how they existed. And of course, this is them down here, and they really occupied this incredible plain, that had just, incredible structure of defenses. I mean, you could almost say in more modern terms, the way the many of the of the Pashtuns are in, in what's basically Western Pakistan and Eastern Afghanistan are in the mountainous regions. I mean, it's just arguably very like inhospitable to somebody coming in, because it's not small, it's big. You just need huge amount of forces. You have just massive defensive positions. I mean, you'd be stuck there fighting forever. And so that, obviously it's a benefit. And then I think, some of, like she said, we have to really go by sources. And so I want to sort of use the best sources that we have, and, to basically discuss what they thought of them. And obviously there's, they all have their own point of view and axe to grind and so on. But, I figured I'd sort of drop a few of these in. And obviously they
Excuse
weren't
me,
all.
Aaron.
Yes.
Before you go, are you planning to explain? You showed a very good picture about how the society
Yes.
rule was organized. Are you planning to explain about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go into what's called the Spartan codes, which I actually think are, in some weird way, I think they're almost more important than anything else, especially for how we think of the world, because I think we can kind of think of heuristics and rules, and so when you sort of see how they view codes, it sort of gives you a guidepost to to think about how the society must have evolved, because they obviously maintained pretty extreme discipline. So if any of those codes were enforced, they obviously, made sure they happened to everybody.
But what I meant, it's not just the codes, because they created very complex system of administration that had a lot of checks and balances,
Yeah.
actually similar to the American Constitution, because
Yeah,
there was not a tyranny at all.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I mean, I sort of got into a well on that one. So I'm really, what I can do is maybe just do, or we could do a separate one on, let's call it Greek governance, and obviously include the Spartans on that, just because it's just so deep, right? I mean, you could spend hours, days on it, right? Uh, but so I'll have like a cursory coverage. But if there's stuff you want to add, I mean, please do.
Yeah, I could actually say it in a few words.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
they basically had what they call Gerusia, which is 30 members of 60 or over. Keep in mind this word, like like gerophilia, it means old. So Gerusia was 30 members of or elders, council of elders, and they have that. They also had Apelia, which is like a gathering of all citizens. And then they had two kings that are very rarely agreed with each other for two different dynasties. And they also had five ephors that actually control the behavior of kings. They could be judged how the king behaved. So in these ways, that's what I mean, like checks and balances. Nobody could overreach in their power. So they had very complex system. So nobody had absolute rule. That's all.
Yeah, and thank you so much. And I have a few. I have a one slide on that. So when we get to that, you can also go into it, which I think would be great. So one of the things that they so their um, hoplite their army was designed to leverage the phalanx as as an approach to fighting, and obviously given their training, and we'll get into that, that made them extremely formidable. um, and obviously they had incredible endurance, and they just had a tenaciousness, and a discipline and a yield in command to their leadership. And so it made them extremely challenging to confront, and the more you dig into them, it's pretty obvious why um they were so powerful. You could almost make an argument they sort of underutilized their capacity, right? If they were truly a expansionist tyrannical state, um, I mean, like anything in life like that, it doesn't last. And either they were rational enough to understand that, or they thought they were so elite um, that everyone else was sort of beneath them. But it to me, it's pretty clear that if they wanted to, invade and destroy, I would say an enormous amount of what we consider Greece today, they had the capacity to do that. They just chose not to do that in sort of like an extreme imperialism. Um, but so they were in some strange way almost designed to be able to do that, and they just culturally and through their constitutional system didn't really do that. And so a couple things I'm going to go over, or this is sort of the overview of their values: discipline, unity, uniformity, loyalty, obedience, endurance, courage, competition, honor, reverence for elders. I mean, this was when we say the word Spartan and we think we mean something, like this is sort of what we mean. I mean, it's this extreme, and of course, these are all wonderful things. You want to tell your younger nephew or niece, some good ideas to sort of think about how to be, a decent human being and so on. So there's almost nothing wrong with all of these, but they took these obviously to I mean, what they did is they implemented them as provable behaviors in society, and of course, as I think we all know, that's not a fantastic recipe for. I mean, it's a great recipe, I guess, for order and some type of, extreme, you know, society of sort of limited agency and and just this sort of warlike preparation or conflict-like preparation, which I think they really saw themselves as always being in some state of war. I think most people understand sort of their what we'd call ruthless eugenics, which was basically these the council of inspectors, which was this council of elders, would come and every time there was a child, a boy born, they would inspect them, and then they would if they felt the child wasn't up to par, they would leave the child outside in exposure for a couple days, and if the child obviously lived, then the child was clearly okay and ready for Spartan life, and if not, they died. And so clearly there was
Could I just say one thing about that? Even that was not all that uncommon in Greece, but one of the differences in Sparta was it was a state decision essentially. So in other cities, especially the poor, might make that same decision that they didn't have the finances or to support a child.
Yep.
But it was the family that did it, and in Sparta it was institutionalized, and the state, governance actually did it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great point. I mean, obviously, in all of history, our species has done some, had to do things like that or felt that they've had. But like you said, this was, state institute policy, and almost a form. It's a strange overlay of almost a type of communism, but not like we think of communism, like Marxism, et cetera, but a communitarianism that also had this sort of form of democratic governance, which then also had this extreme cultural norms all put together in a war-ready nation. So it's why I think they endure, because they're just. I mean, I'm sure there's been dozens or hundreds of tribes in the history of the world that, have variants like this, but not to this sort of city-state level, and sort of the power they had and their war-making ability if and when they chose.
May I just add? Actually, this society is quite unique. There is nothing like this known. And the reason, just want to remind, the reason why they created this society is because of as a result of Mycenaean wars in 8th and 7th century BC, they claimed a very fertile territory of Mycenae, which was very densely populated, unlike Laconia, which was just a valley between mountains. And the population of helots, they turned Mycenaeans into helots, which is almost like a slave. The population, they were compared to the Spartans between maybe 7-1, and some historians believe it was 9-1. So they had to control a huge population with very little human resources, and that led them to create this society. Because obviously, in the Mycenaean times, Sparta was like any other polis, but it was created later after the Mycenaean wars and the needs to control population.
Yep. No, absolutely. That's and that within that context made sense in the beginning, but once they sort of sustained power, then it became in essence sort of the state religion, and they didn't. Ultimately they didn't evolve too much when it came to that, because they sort of integrated their belief system that they were endowed, they were ultimately entitled, which I think most controlling powers felt that way. The few things about the Spartan Code and education that was I found interesting was this this disregard really for what we would call more formal learning, relative writing and literacy of the day. If your mother basically gave that to you before you were 7, then you obviously had an advantage, and that would require the fact that she would have had that, and your family would have had that. But basically, between 7 and 30, when you were, in this sort of, Thunderdome of training, if you guys ever remember Mad Max Thunderdome, um, you, whatever you could sort of pick up along the way, unless you were obviously royalty, or you were sort of cherry picked, or when you had your mentors, uh, that was about all of what you'd call this sort of formal education that was relative to Spartan society. And then it sort of flipped, assuming you became a Spartan citizen, and you'd spend, decades in ultimately sort of catching up, which, I just found that, I mean, that was really strange, really, ultimately. I mean, it obviously it served a purpose to maintain such a limited population in terms of education and history and ultimately organization. Um, if there's a direct correlation there, which I don't know if that's true, but they just might have believed that too, and they also just might have believed it was not very important to the sort of Spartan development that you had, what we'd call, learnedness. Um,
Aaron, one
yes.
question. So you said that they were taken away from the family. So were they stationed in one separate place? 2 questions. That's one. And 2, what about sex? I mean, this age, what did they do? I mean,
We'll indirectly get into the second question, and then the first question. You had, what you'd almost call a federation or a federated model of how those training camps operated. So it wasn't like a single consolidated training camp when kids were 7. It was, very much, like you'd see a modern sort of, these smaller towns, if you live in New York or New Jersey, or where you have a high school that's, for that town, you could say those were the sort of training camps, and then they would sort of move their way up
but they were separate from society, and they would.
absolutely. And so and I'm not going to really get into. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, yeah, so they had up to a certain age. I'm not sure what age it was, but once they graduate to a certain level, then they would transfer them to another, let's call it a barracks, but they call it a Sistia, where it's basically like a commune where all the men would dine together. They would eat together, they'd bathe together, they'd live together, up until I think they were 30, in which they would then be able to take a wife. And that's another story in itself, which
I'm going to get into all that. I have broken down, but so I'm not going to cover Spartan Women Code with women because I know Sergio is going to get into that too. So, but I just wanted to sort of give you, quick high level. Now, and I'll get into this when it comes to their training. Boys and girls would have. I don't want to necessarily call it co-training. That's probably incorrect, but they were encouraged to sort of both develop themselves. That would probably be the best way to put it. And obviously there's this reality that Spartan women relative to Greek women, did have had more agency or potential of more agency, which for that period and for almost any other period was also unique. Especially, I mean, didn't mean that you didn't have queens and you didn't have sort of royalty that were like that, but in terms of just a larger population, the fact that Spartan women could inherit property, that they could speak out, that they could in essence participate in society. maybe not completely, but it was, it was far more substantial than almost anybody. And I would almost argue that was probably a scary thing too. I mean, just to other nations, to other Greek city states, is just the idea that, well, if basically if the Spartans put up a female army and they could probably defeat us, I mean, how scary are the men, right? It's just sort of this. It must have been just something that many of them just couldn't even process.
All right, but one thing that I don't know if this is what you are saying. The separation of sexes were until they were 30 years old for the men and the women. I mean, so that's extremely abnormal.
Absolutely. They had a lot of abnormalness when it came to trying to manipulate human behavior. I mean, very much, it's I'd say the closest, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but there's a strain in very extreme Marxist Maoist thinking about the dissolution of the family. And
I'm talking more about the church, like
or the church. Yeah. I would say or the church, where it's sort of like a fusion of the two, where you really tried to control, evolutionary behavior, right? And you do it at a society level scale, and you enforce it with a code system, and you didn't really have this sort of bribing, cheating, able to get out of it, which is typically been the case whenever we've tried to put systems like that in place, because human beings want to do what they always have wanted to do. And the Spartans were, obviously, I'm sure there were exceptions, but, they seem to be able to enforce this, fairly substantially. And so, it's like they were building, at a certain level, you almost have to look at it as they were building a cult. I mean, I think that's the closest thing I could, but at a certain point, if a state is a cult, which there have been, obviously. But
wanted to add that they practiced homosexuality.
Yep.
It was very common, and also men were free to have sex with helots women.
Yep.
Without any repercussion.
Yeah, I mean, the helots were this sort of human extraction platform for them, right? I mean, to just make it brutally simple. I mean, they basically treated them the way they treated animals almost, or odds are they probably treated animals better. But it was at that level. And of course, they had all these insane, contradictions, obviously, and all these enforcements of behaviors. I mean, the thing that's pretty obvious is that, and this is where I was squaring the education issue earlier, is that if you're trying to have a society that has to follow this many rules, you probably don't want to have a lot of people who can read really well and can question a lot of rules, especially when they're young, and can try to have arguments and organize and can have references to history around that. So, my sense is that might have had something to do with it also.
Can I just say something before we get too far from it? I just wanted to make a comment again about the relation between the sexes. The men in the camps could actually sneak out at night as long as they didn't get caught. And some of them were married at 20. They encouraged people to marry older, but many were married at 20. And as long as they weren't caught, and it helped provide stealth training in stealth and things like that. Exactly. By just doing that. And there was a phrase that said, the Spartan man can father many children before ever seeing his wife in daylight.
Yeah.
Because until they were 30, they had to be in the camps, but that didn't mean that they couldn't be married or sneak out.
Sure.
But the idea that they have to sneak out, I think, is kind of...
Well, it was on purpose. There are several things like that.
Nature, because you have to follow this extreme. I mean, I find it incredible.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I have to intervene. I apologize. We have a second presenter today. Really apologize. And we're just trying, we're kind of short on time. We're going to get to the camps, which was me in the presentation today. So let's leave the questions maybe for when there's going to be a break. I apologize. Thank you.
So that was sort of, let me go through some of the code stuff, just because I wanted to give you that sense of the code. Let me go here. So they were obviously pretty athletic. They had a caste system where, the Spartan citizens, the top, enjoyed full rights. The non-Spartan free men were raised as Spartans. You had the sort of freedmen, then you had the slave population. There was as mentioned earlier, there was somewhere between 7-to-1 and 10-to-1 ratio between the Helots and the Spartans. And only Spartans actually, were allowed to receive Agoge. And we sort of talked about this. They one of the things, and we'll get into this when it comes to their training, but they have this incredibly broad definition of athleticism, which would include dance, include sort of singing, it was really social preparation. I mean, it was almost like in the old, not in the old world, but in the past when you used to have men's clubs, right? And guys would go, and drink beer and do things like that, and just talk and get sort of rowdy. They didn't do all that stuff. I mean, I'm sure they did some of that, but it was like a training mixed with that, and it gave obviously enormous camaraderie, which ultimately, I mean, if you think about it, if you were going to build these human machines as phalanxes, this is a really good approach to try to do that, because you're locking in people for an enormous period of time, and they're just going to be, I mean, you're almost fusing them together. And if and when the time comes that you're going to fight and you're going to implement these incredibly intense phalanxes, then which are very hard to penetrate, this was a good approach, right? Your goal in doing that is not to rent soldiers. That's probably not going to work. So one of the things that that you had were basically these sort of step brother, and I'm not trying to overlay our modern sort of legal definition, but almost like a molester, really, of these younger boys and young men, who also trained them and gave them guidance and and sort of a path or journey into life, and they had these very, very precise rules of behavior, which I don't know how those were really enforced. I don't know if that was just more theory and sort of legend. There's probably a little bit of both, because people are who they are, and at a certain point, I don't know how you can control that when you're dealing with thousands of people across a whole area. So, and someone can help me, I cannot pronounce this. It's
perioikoi.
Perioikoi.
Yeah.
Thank you. Perioikoi. So, these were free non-citizen inhabitants of Sparta. So basically traders and many manufacturers, we've studied populations like this in other societies. I forgot the Japanese version of this, that were not a lowest class, but they were considered a lower class because they had to do this sort of plumbing in society of commercial trade. But and I don't know, I guess Richard's not here, but to me, that's sort of what they, what they were. They couldn't marry Spartan men or women. They weren't represented. They had no political agency whatsoever. They were taxed. So, it was almost like they were this buffer commercially to get things done, and also just sort of this outer shell around the Spartan society, which of course could be sacrificed at will if necessary. And they also acted as these, really like plantation managers of the helots. Um, so um, so the helots, I think we've covered them in the past. There was this ritualism that allowed Spartans to sort of kill them without any risk of uh, of you know of Spartan prosecution. They belonged to the state, so they arguably were equivalent of animals, really, in some sort of way. And then there was a secret police, which I didn't really get too far into. They were called the Cryptia, I think, and obviously they built this horrific culture of fear and all right, so let me get kind of beyond um, this area here. All right, so we talked. So let me get into these sort of. So there's these. So there were age divisions in the Agoge and originally there were 5 divisions called Morai, which drew from the 5 tribal regions, or the Obai of Sparta, and that was increased to 6. And basically 500 to 1,000, basically like a battalion, were the ranges for each of them on a consistent basis. And then there was another group called the Hepius. They were the knights, and that's the 300. We've talked about them before, and that number wasn't always 300, but then we talked about the warfare, and that's what one really looks like. Or fake one, at least. All right, let me get past this real quick here. So they carried a long spear, they carried a sword, they had their shield. They obviously spent, literally decades, mastering this. So I don't know if there's been, I'd say samurai, right? That's probably the equivalent, that are people that have been so committed to such a long training and development process, and sort of mastery and craftsmanship around it. And we saw in the past how how powerful they've been. All right, so let me get into the last thing I'll get into before I kind of get into the structure there. I know I've got about 15 minutes or so. So this was their phalanx, which was usually 8 to up to 15 ranks deep. So they fought in formations, they operated in formations, they had a command system in formations. You could argue that just, the Romans just scaled this, is what they did. Obviously they had some other innovations, but fundamentally, I'd say the Spartan phalanx was, the way it was integrated was incredibly unique to history at that point. Not that others haven't discovered how to do this, but just how massive it could be. And obviously in that era, to see those formations, coming at you, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 of them, that had to be a pretty scary day. Let's see. Yeah, and the techniques were pretty simple. It was a group and shove technique, and then eventually you break down the enemy lines, and then that's it. It's kind of all over. And they would maintain that formation, so they would almost be this like strange little herd, just moving around, the battlefield until they basically decimated the enemy, and then they would break formation to finish off, whatever the enemy was. But they were very intelligent about deploying. They sort of understood. I think they understood sort of limitations. So they would rarely attack, like break formation and try to attack a retreating force that didn't have any formation, which makes a lot of sense even in the modern world, because you can get flanked, right? Someone come around you, you'll have your supply lines broken, you won't have any concentration of force. So they used feints. So, you know, they were pretty robust, let's put it that way, when it came to the military tactics. And I wanted to bring all this together because I think understanding the Agoge around, you know, like it was a driver for the behavior they had for that, you know, 10 to 20 years that someone was going to be developed. So let's see. So this was Pericles' funeral speech, which I think someone covered last month, if I can remember. But so, you know, this was clearly the, you know, the belief here, and we'll get into why this was all true. So the goal was physical strength, military prowess, communal bonds, discipline, and obedience. It's pretty simple. And so we talked about you're inspected, you were taken to the place of rejection, and then you started your journey on understanding the values in Spartan culture from 7 to 12. You had a warden, so you're basically in some form of a child prison of training and preparedness. You were given a it was really about austerity. You were given very little of anything: food, clothing, safety, protection from the elements, you know, everything. Your head was shaven. It was all competition. You know, you were in this cauldron, you know, continuously, which, you know, clearly meant they had to have some boundary limits, because no matter how tough a 7 to 12-year-old can be, there are physical limits that a child can go through. So, I mean, we don't know what those are in terms of what they understood them to be, but there were certain limits that, you know, you probably couldn't make a 7-year-old go on a 100-mile forced march, right? That probably doesn't work out real well. And so they clearly, you know, understood some of those boundaries, but it was, you know, they seem to have pushed all the way up to those boundaries. This is Degas. This is a famous painting that he did, which, you know, is pretty amazing. And you know, so men and women were encouraged to be around each other, you know, as they grew up, and dance, and obviously young people that are basically naked are likely to do things. So, you know, clearly that was, you know, ultimately accepted. Let's see here. And then so the next stage was this 13 to 18 years old. And someone brought this up earlier. So this is where they got a little bit of writing and reading. They got a lot more exposure to music, dance, you'd say almost culture. They had continuous competitions. You know, they encouraged, you know, like was said earlier, you kind of ran out at night, or you're encouraged to have theft, but if you were caught, you were severely punished. Which I don't really know how you can do that with that many people. So that must have been really strange, actually, like when you think about that, because you have all this discipline you're trying to manage, and then you have all these people running around like, you know, like these thieves. So, you know, but somehow they were able to it had to be incredibly arbitrary. I mean, I don't know any other way that you could have done that. I mean, I'm sure they had some type of governing rules, system, and adjudication on, you know, we're going to judge him or her this, or him this way, and he stole that, and we caught him, versus the other one that we will pretend we didn't catch or whatever, right? But ultimately, to me, I found that to be really funky, actually, because I could sort of understand it for little kids, but as you know, as they become basically adults, um, how do you really have all these people running around stealing things, and getting caught, and and getting the hell kicked out of them, right? It's but that was their values. So a couple things are, they had this um, religious belief in the state, and sort of in the values of the Ogoge, and in terms of fighting for it, and fighting for, I don't know, fighting for each other. That was the thing I didn't quite get out of it. I'm sure that at a human level, that's what you wind up having friends, right? Even if they try to prevent you. So I'm sure that was fundamental, and that's always been pretty fundamental in warfare and building of armies. But there wasn't really a push for that, right? And then stage 4, this is when things got real, right? This is when you would really start, you were really a soldier at that point, or at the last stages of it. And and so obviously the brutality must have increased, because you were engaging with Spartans on a regular basis, helots, and and other combat formations, and so and other forces. Stage 5 and 6 and then 7, which we talked about earlier, was the full citizenship in 7. And so in 5, you were a full-time soldier, which was 19 to 24. It was probably a little broader than that. I'm sure they judged people like most people have in history by how they looked. He looks older, he looks younger, he's big, he's small, whatever. So I'm sure that it wasn't exactly 19 to 24. I'm sure they kept records, or they tried to. And then stage 6, this is when you were what I sort of look at it as you were their version of an officer or non-commissioned officer, right? You were providing sort of the leadership across the board in this whole process, end to end. And you organize the competitions. Obviously, if there was fighting, you were not on the front line. I'm sure there was a handful that were, because they got their ego and their pride around that. But on average, I mean, these were the most cultivated people in their society, arguably at a war making level. So I'm sure they were, and there was probably not a massive amount of them, just proportionally. And then stage 7 was the 30 to 60 years of age, when you had really all your rights. You were forced to marry if you were single. You had these sort of communal meals we talked about earlier. So it was this sort of power men's club of the ancient world. And let's see. So this is a few historians in terms of their their take on it, and which ultimately there was like a culling here, which obviously worked, until it didn't, but it worked for quite a long time. And it built this, this spring-loaded society that could just sort of explode itself on any threats. And given its geography and topography, it makes sense why it wasn't really confronted directly for centuries. And like I said earlier, it's sort of astonishing they weren't as imperialistic as they could have been, which I think on average of any society building something like this is of extreme rarity. So
Yeah, can I just add something, Aaron? We don't know a lot about as far as their economy, right? I mean, everything's based on the Helots doing everything, but maybe to your point, if they expanded in trade more and foreign policy, they might have grew. I mean, that's what the Romans did. The Romans had their hands on everything, where Sparta just stayed right where they were and made sure that they were the fiercest mighty machine. But at the end of the day, it's about, expanding an economy,
Yeah. The other thing is, and I didn't really talk about this, but they upped the ante as people became older. So, they basically used helots as training devices. So, that's how you got your sort of, hunts out of the way, right? Or if you go fishing or hunting or you ever have been in your life or been around that process, right? Your any of your animal or fish proteins don't show up at your store nice and red, right? Someone had to do the deed to get them to you, and that process they integrated in. So that had to build, a very disassociative personality, by this point. It sort of amazes me that they could, at some level function normally, if we even know they did by the time they were in their 30s to 60s. I mean, they must have been psychologically, a mess. I mean, I just don't know how you can drive human beings like animals like this for decades, really, and or their whole life. And then you sort of spin them up as these sort of elegant citizens that can make all these great decisions. But they seem to have figured out some version of that. And like we said, we don't have a lot of our sources are sort of all over the map. So these are, the full citizens. A couple pieces about that is that they were given farms, also helots by the state. They sort of had an older version of what everybody else went through. So they still had physical exercise. There was never conversation, or obviously somebody I'm sure did, but there was not social, communications around money and commerce. That was looked down upon completely. And they had these very austere lifestyles. I think that's, yeah, and these are some of the sources of evidence. So, and obviously some others in modern archaeology and anthroarchaeology. And let's see, we already went through this. Yeah. So, any questions? I know I ran over by a few minutes, but I don't know how you want to handle this. Was this good? But number one, please judge me. I want to know because
this was amazing, Aaron.
Awesome.
I was really surprised. Sergio, how do you want to handle? You want people to ask 5-minute questions, or you want to?
Oh yeah. Of course. You ask.
All right. So Marika, Jerry, anybody has any questions, please do. Aaron, this was incredible. This good. So much thought process went into it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
It was awesome, Aaron. One fundamental thing I didn't quite catch. Could you only become a Spartan if you were from a Spartan family? In other words, a strong helot couldn't just sort of get into that system. So they were limited sort of generationally to what they themselves produced from the original bloodlines.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure like in any society, there was some edge cases that happened, but there was not in mass, right? That just didn't happen. And so you're right. I mean, and given the way they treated the birthing process and the initial development, that had to be a big constraint. Now, my guess is when they understood, you know, sort of like a supply chain, they understood some of their limits they were coming up against. They probably at times, you know, ritualistically, you know, we'll leave the baby out there, we'll pretend we did it for 2 days, whatever, because, you know, if I mean, they could count, obviously, so if there were only 3 births in a month or whatever, right, there was some really thin period, I'm sure at a certain point, you know, they recognized that wasn't an optimal, you know, approach.
Yeah, and I read something that in times of war, that sometimes the women would actually have children with a helat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you think about it, that's a half. That's a half.
So that's like a half.
Spartan.
Yeah. So that's obvious that clearly there was these exceptions that they developed around their society, which obviously they had to for that many hundreds of years, you know, whatever, half a millennium. So, you know, you wind up having this sort of, you know, like the magical realism of what it was, and then the reality of what it was. You know, but ultimately, you know, my guess is they kept pretty true to this, you know, as you know, 80-90% of the time, which is, you know, it's never, I don't think this is anything like this has been done at this scale in the history of the world. I mean, these are just incredibly, I mean, it has every word you want to use. It's barbaric, it's insane, it's incredible. I mean, it's just like, just keep throwing all the adjectives out there, because they're going to land on the Spartans somewhere. And I think there's a reason people just look at them as almost like space aliens, because they kind of were.
How many generations or hundreds of years did they keep this going?
So the Romans ultimately conquered in, what was it? Was it 240?
No, Romans conquered Greece in 160s.
Oh, 160. You're right. 160.
But it's as far as Sparta is concerned, it was really stopped being a dominant state after Boeotians won the Battle of Leptra in 371. And then keep in mind that shortly after that, the Macedonians completely overwhelmed Greeks, and they are no longer dominant force. And Spartans certainly lost it to the Thebans.
So it was what, about 3 centuries, right? Would that be about right?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, from 800 to 371. Yeah,
4 centuries. Yeah, so about 4 centuries, which is, you know,
Aaron, I'm sorry, and you said they were not expansionist, but were they in general, in comparison with Athens, or were they more in war against or defending, or they didn't have many wars because nobody wanted to mess with them?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably an all the above version. I mean, given anyone, and of course everybody knew who they were and how they trained and just how incredible they were on a battlefield. I just can't see anybody wanting to shake that snake. I mean, it just to me looks absurd, right? And
until Thebans.
Exactly. And
but I just wanted to say that, first of all, they didn't want to expand because they had limited human resources.
That's right.
And they knew that they couldn't sustain more territory. They couldn't even conquer the whole Peloponnesus. But the main thing is that in those days, this was the only state that maintained a regular army. No other city-states had a regular army. They only fought at the times of war. But in Sparta, the Spartans only were dedicated to war, you know, by a certain age, and nothing else. They were not working.
All right, I hate to stop you guys. I apologize.
Sorry.
Sergio, please go ahead. I mean, it's already 11 past.
Sorry about that.
No problem at all. This is great. Can you get the camera on me?
Aaron, can you stop sharing, please?
Yes, I will. Sorry. Come on, Zoom. What's going on here? Oh, that's weird.
Sergio, what are you eating there?
Pardon me. I'm in the middle of lunch, guys. So please pardon me, but don't worry. I'll type in.
my Zoom. I'm not getting my Zoom here. That's weird.
You want me to? I can.
Yeah, can you take it? That's strange. I'm just not getting my.
How do I make you stop sharing? You can't stop sharing.
Well, I'm not
Just
able to.
click on the Zoom icon on the bottom.
Yeah.
You see where that camera? Click on it, and it will pop up the Zoom. On the bottom, just say stop share. On the top, you have stop sharing. No.
Oh, duh. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. You mean up here at the top?
Yeah.
So how come that's weird? I'm not getting the top of it up here. Oh, there it is. Okay. Sorry. That was
Okay.
it. Okay.
All right. Sergio, you're on.
Can you make the whole screen like that or no? Can you see?
You are. You are the whole
I am?
screen right now. Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry about that because I can't. Just want to make you.
We can see everything, and we can literally see everything in your house. Right?
What do I have to do so that I could be? See, right now I'm the small one and you're in the big one. You know how I could reverse it? Is there a way I could do it on my end?
I can make you a host, maybe that way.
Yeah, that would help.
I mean, we can see you. We could see you a lot.
I know, but I need to see me. Otherwise, I'll just be making a mess of myself as we did last time. If you can do it, if not, then I'll work around it.
No. I will listen.
Appreciate that. You guys are the best.
All right. Yeah, Sergio. So I'm making Sergio a host.
Oh, the honor's mine.
All right, you're a host now.
Okay. Not much, but what do I have to do?
Sergio, you want to just see your image? Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah. What do I have to do?
Try gallery view, maybe? Near upper right, there's like a view button.
Speakers view.
Speakers view,
Up to the view.
Speakers
and then it says, yeah.
We see what, yeah, right there. Well, it's
I don't see. I
gallery
see
on top, next to the exit full screen. There's a gallery on top.
When I click
Speakers
on
view.
more participants, where
No. On top where it says exit full screen, on top.
I don't have that. Exit full screen. I have end.
You have a little button on the upper right, very far upper right.
All right, you know what? This is good. This is good. I found a way. So can you see me? You can see my whole body, everything, right?
Yeah, we can see you. You're very clear.
All right, cool. Sorry about that. But sorry for the delay. I apologize. Anyway, so Zach, you were asking me what I was having for lunch, and I decided to make the milos zomas. Okay, and what that is, that's the famous black broth or the blood broth, which was a staple in the Spartan diet, and it had a reputation of tasting terrible. In fact, there's a story of a man from southern Italy. Went to Sparta to visit, and when he tried this for the first time, his words were something like, "Now I see why the Spartan soldier embraces death so joyfully, for dead men no longer need to eat, and the black broth is unnecessary." So in other words, a dead Spartan's a happy Spartan, right? Not exactly a 5-star review, but listen, we're history buffs here, and I'm going to try it, and I'm going to tell you what I think, okay?
Good luck. You use bull's blood?
Interesting.
Did you put some blood in there too? Because that's
Let
what
me-
they did.
I'll get to that, Greg. Well, actually, it's pretty good, I'll be honest with you, but I have to be honest. It's not actually the real blood broth or the milozomas. And the reason is, not because I don't want to make it, because we don't have a recipe that survives to this day. And so therefore, we only have these written accounts by these non-Spartans, by the way, of how really good it was or how bad it was. So we really don't know. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about these fun little stories or these phrases that have been left behind and see how consistent they were or how misinterpreted they become from time to time. And I'll also discuss some of the objects in Spartan culture. And then the second part, I'll talk about the women of Sparta and their role in society where the men were going out and training in battle. And feel free to weigh in anytime, okay? This is completely subjective and ask questions. So let's go back to the black broth. Okay, so the black broth is another story from about the black broth where King Pontus asks a slave boy to make him the broth, and after he expresses his dislike, the slave says, "Your Majesty, for one to enjoy this meal, one must first bathe in Eurotas." And Eurotas is basically the river in Laconia, in Sparta. And basically, you have to be a Spartan to enjoy this meal. So that's one way of interpreting it. Or another way, maybe they just weren't creative as far as cuisine wise, right? Because we know compared to the other Greek states. So we know, for example, in Athens, they were closer to the ocean, so they had access to fish and seafood and fresh fruits and vegetables. Where in Laconia, they grew mostly grain and lentils, and their meats were mostly pork and lamb. So again, it might have compared to other people, such as the man from southern Italy, or the Athenians, or Thebes, or Corinth. They might not have been so inventive when it came to cuisine, but they might have enjoyed it to themselves. This might have been to them like New England clown chowder or something like that, or some really good soup. So we don't know exactly how good it was or how bad it was. We just have to take it with a little grain of salt. And by the way, what we know what went into this was vinegar, pig's blood, pig's meat, and salt. Okay, and salt. Yeah. And by the way, I totally cheated. Okay. This is not actually blood, by the way. This is it's just black beans and onions and lime. I totally cheated. But there are blood sausages. I don't know if depending on where you're from. I know Latin America, we have a lot of countries have blood sausages called morcilla. And then I think Germany and Poland, they also have them too. So maybe give you some idea of how to taste them. And for me,
France
actually,
and Louisiana too.
Where?
Yep.
France and Louisiana.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans too.
Cool.
Italians have blood sausages, and they use blood in the sausage. Most places that would slaughter a pig is going to have a blood sausage.
Yeah, but not everybody's crazy about it. I think it's pretty good, but hey, to each his own. Yeah. All right, so let's go to the next story, and this story comes from Herodotus. We have all heard this one, when Dionysius is being told about the massive size of the Persian army, in which when they draw their archers, draw their arrows and shoot them into the sky, it's going to cloud the sun, right? And then his response was, "All the better, but we will fight in the shade." I love that. That is a great response. It gives us the ethos of the Spartan warrior, his brave, his tenacity, his boldness, his badass move. Pardon my French. And whether this really occurred or not, I think Herodotus is debatable to some of us. I think it's very credible that this story, not the story, but the saying actually happened. And nobody's saying that they actually shot arrows and it covered the whole sun. No, he was just giving you an idea of how the magnitude of the size of their army. And we know Xerxes commanded a lot of forces all throughout the Persian Empire, from Bactria to India to all parts of Persia. And the archer was a very common type of soldier, very expendable. It wasn't like the heavy infantry soldier that had all this equipment. Archers throughout time were the more simple of all the soldiers. It doesn't take too much to make a bow and arrow, even though their arrows were more sophisticated because they used a horn, sinew, and wood. So I think, yeah, this saying is definitely credible during the War of Thermopylae. Now, speaking of war, one of the ways they communicated that we believe is through this thing called the scatale decipher. And what that is, it's a way of getting a message across from one person to another in secrecy, kind of like a Morse code for its day. So it just acquired like a strip of leather or linen and a decipher, which could have just been a pole of some sort. So here, I don't think you could see it, but here's a message, okay? I wrote a message in this whole strip of leather here, and I don't hope you can't. If you know how this works, please don't give it away. If you don't, just stay tuned. Okay, so there's a message there. And let's just say I need to get a message across to my colleague Aaron, all right, who's commanding another army on another side of the field, and I need to tell him something that needs to be done, or warn him or so forth. So I will have the message here, and I will send it to my Hela, to his camp, right? But it's very important he has this piece. This is the decipher, okay? So how this works is that once he gets this message, he will wrap the strip around the pole like this, and hopefully, if done correctly, a message would come out of it. Okay, now it didn't have to be leather, it could have been linen, as I said, or it didn't have to be a square pole. It could have been round, it could have been octagon, it could have been all different shapes. The point is that as long as when everything lined up correctly, a message will come. So I'm gonna put this on the screen, and hopefully you guys can read my handwriting or my spelling, because I'm actually terrible at both. Why don't you, Zach, why don't you read that if you can read that? I hope it's not backwards.
Attack at nightfall.
Yes, very good. So that's one of their, we believe that they might have communicating during wartime. By the way, this was also an Egyptian innovation too.
So they had Zoom. I'm just kidding.
So, Sergio,
I think they might have, yeah, like a few centuries later. Anyhow,
Sergio,
yes.
Quick question. So, I'm missing something about that cipher in the sense that you would have to have wrapped the leather or linen in a particular way to line up the letters. So that would have had to be prearranged.
Yes, absolutely. When you wrap it up,
start somewhere.
In other words, the recipient knew how this worked, but by all means. So he would have this at all time, okay? And I would have my message, and I would have another piece like this, and I would send it to him, and he would already have this. He'd wrap it up, and then the message would come out. So
yeah, but it'd have to be prearranged where the leather, what part of the leather to start wrapping around so that the letters align.
Sure, yeah. If you want to get really specific, I would imagine, yes, for sure, they would have to have been trained how to use this. Absolutely, Mark, good point.
Sergio, in your defense, it'd be trial and error. They just keep doing it till they could actually read something.
Is that right?
It makes sense. Think about it.
Well, yes. Listen, I was going to point out that this thing is definitely easily to intercept. I mean, there's not much to it. If you knew that they were communicating with this, you just have to figure out, try different, shapes of poles, lengths, and sizes. So until you eventually, but yes, good point, Joe, that they would eventually correct it. But again, this might have been a thing for speed. You know, if you send a message really quickly, and rather than somebody, the helot getting captured, and then they find the message, they wouldn't be able to read it so quickly.
And the other thing is that you're, which really everyone's practice is that you can control misinformation also, right? Because you could say today is the short stick day, tomorrow's a long stick day. You could have this kind of calendar.
Yeah.
Then you could just blast out a ton of messages. And at a certain point, you're just going to overwhelm your enemy's intelligence, and which is what everyone that knows what they're doing has been doing for a very long time. So I have to imagine, that they practiced, very similar dark arts that way also.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. It makes me think of World War II, where the British and Germans were sending messages back and forth just to confuse one another, and sure enough, it definitely worked. So yeah, I agree. All right, cool. So the next story I'm going to talk about, another classic one. We haven't heard of this one, about the boy and the cub fox, right? This one comes from Plutarch, in which a Spartan boy, I remember as Aaron discussed, that he was incentivized to go out and steal, right, but not get caught. And so he finds this little cub fox, and he hides him underneath the cloak to take him back to camp to cook him and eat him, I guess. And then all of a sudden there's a drill inspection call, right? And so all the Spartan boys have to line up for inspection. And he has the little fox, the cub, underneath his cloak. And he has him hidden. He doesn't want to get caught. And the fox starts to bite away. And the boy endures the pain so much that eventually he dies. And that's kind of like the legend of, again, the Spartan spirit and the soul, that even to the end, they don't give in. It gives us a good idea of how, strong they were supposed to be. Now, did this really happen? I highly doubt it. It's not likely. You're going to get bit by an animal so much that you're not going to express pain like that. Maybe another version of it happened. Perhaps maybe he captured a fox, and then the fox bit him. And then, rather than getting medical attention, he just went out and mean, he went back to the inspection, and then he bled to death or got infected, and then he died, which is still the same, kind of like still the same story somewhat, but I don't think it happened necessarily like that. But anyhow, it's a great story. And now I want to talk about the cloak, the chlamys. We know that they were given each a crimson color. This is more burgundy, and I couldn't get a crimson color, but they were each given a cloak as part of their uniform. In fact, I was just thinking of this. This might actually be the first military uniform. Think about it. You know, we don't know a lot. Like some people believe the Romans all wore red. That's not true at all. Their shields were red sometimes, but that wasn't a requirement. Well, we know the Spartans were all wearing this crimson cloak. So I couldn't find anything that was close to that. Some people think Athens wore blue. I mean, a lot of times when we see maps, military maps, Athens will be represented with blue and Spartan red, but there's no proof of that anywhere. Sure, they were by the sea and they did have a navy, but that, again, we don't see blue as their official color. But this might have been the first uniforms in history. Just pointing it out there. So I'm gonna demonstrate how the cloak might have been worn, or the chlamys. This is called a chlamys, which is a military style cloak. There were different cloaks all throughout time, and basically it'd be clamped together with a pin. And while I'm doing that, just want to discuss what cloaks. So cloaks have two functions, or maybe three. One, to keep you warm. Two, to keep you dry. And three, yeah, they were fashionable, but that's only after reasons 1 and 2. So they keep you warm because they would have been made of wool, right? And usually sheep's or lamb's wool. And they keep you dry because the wool would have been so tightly weaved together, and sometimes they would put wax on it so that when it rains, unless it was heavy rain, but it was a normal rain, the drops would just repel off the cloak. So that would keep them dry when they're marching. So this is how chlamys would have been worn. Take my glasses off. So the left-hand side would be exposed, and the right would have been covered. Okay. So now we have. So I'm covered here. Good. Covered to the side, back, and then it's open here. It's completely open here. So yeah, it's pretty good. You know, it keeps me warm and keeps me dry. Now there's a lot of back and forth is whether they fought with these cloaks on, and there's a lot of people, a big school of thought that thinks that, including myself, believe that they did not fight wearing these cloaks on. And I'll give you some reasons as to why. Why? I mean, it could have gotten in the way. It's not hard to carry a spear with this, but it could get in the way. Two, you don't want this to be on you when you're in battle. Let's just say you break formation. Somebody could grab a hold of this and pull you down. Okay, so it could be a liability in some sense. And number three, we do know that they fought in the summer months, which it was warm. And this is, like, as I said, the purpose of a cloak is to keep you warm. They wouldn't be fighting in the hot summers of Greece. So it wouldn't make sense for them to fight. And that's why I don't believe they actually fought wearing the cloaks on. But there's no proof of this. So again, we keep going back to the movie. They were not wearing anything but a cloak. No, that's completely made up. It doesn't make any sense for me whatsoever. Anyhow, and then my last piece to share today is the xiphos, okay? The Greek signature short sword. This is the sword that the hoplites would all had. Now the ones like in Athens or Corinth and Thebes and so forth, theirs would have been longer, right? They would have been maybe 25, maybe 30 inches long, but the Spartan ones had shorter ones, okay? They would have been much shorter. Again, we're not sure as to why, but it's a good story about one. And this is a reproduction made of steel and wood, but theirs would have been made of bronze, solid bronze. And unlike the helmets and the armor that they were hammered out of one piece of bronze, this would have been cast. This would have been melted in a mold. So they would have had melted bronze and poured it into a mold, and once it dried, you'd have the xiphos like this. And notice the shape of it. It's very thin here. It's got a leaf shape, and then it gets larger here. This is for thrusting, so all the weight is at the end of the tip, so it would give more of an impact when in battle. And there's another fun story that a Spartan mother is giving her son the xyphos for the first time. And when the son questions its length, the mother responds to the son saying, add a step to it. In other words, we Spartans, we rise to the occasion. We don't need an extra length of a dagger. We could just go in and fight with it. That's one way to interpret it. Another one way is maybe she's saying, you little brat, we're Spartans. We don't run from war, we run to it. Pick what version you want, but I know the one I want. And with that said, I want to talk about the women of Sparta and their role in society. So if we could get into the slides on that, Zach, that would be super amazing. Now, they say if you were going to be a woman in ancient Greece, right, Sparta is where you want to be, because the Spartan woman had a lot of equality. She had a lot of power and a lot of influence. And we're going to try to unwrap that today and get an idea how reality that was. Okay, so first and foremost, the number one priority or the biggest obligation a Spartan woman had was to give birth, okay? That was the most important thing, that from day one, she was to be a mother. Now, with that said, that did not mean this was going to be a stay-home mom, right? Or a 1950s housewife where she stayed home vacuuming and bake pies and stuff. Because no, that was not the case. They had a significant role, and yeah, it's quite fascinating. And as we discussed earlier, just Sparta in general is really, compared to today's world and our mentality, it does seem a little odd and strange. But anyhow, okay, so let's start from the birth. Now, we know, as Aaron described, that when the male infant was born, he was assessed, he was evaluated to make sure he met the requirements, the physical requirements to become a soldier. And if he didn't, unfortunately, he would be discarded, infanticide, which is really sad. Excuse me. Now, I don't think this applied to the women. There's no evidence of that, so we have to assume it didn't. Now, because the women were not going to be going off to war, nor were they going to join the military. So they really didn't have, that didn't apply to them. So once the girl did go home, she would pretty much be with the young boys of the family as equal. If we could go to the next slide, Zach. Yeah, this was not like, in other parts of Greece where a girl would stay home and be the modest girl and learn how to weave and learn how to sew and learn how to cook and stuff like that. No, they were out and about with the boys doing all boy things, okay? Up until the boys were 7, obviously, because then they would have been shipped off to the Agoge. But they were very active and played sports with the boys and exercise and compete with them. They were very competitive. They rode horses, they danced, they threw javelins, they wrestled. They were definitely active, and yeah, they were not like the other girls in Greece, which is pretty amazing. And they also received a formal education. Now, what kind of education is still not clear. Again, it depends on the social class. I don't think they were literate necessarily. I think the ones from elite families would have been, but maybe not. But either way, they were cultured with art and perhaps maybe history and other things. So they were definitely educated girls, again, compared to other Greek states. And they also competed in festivals and races and stuff like that. So there's evidence that they were, in sports team, they ran, they were active in the Olympics. They were definitely they were proud to be Spartan girls. It doesn't seem like they were oppressed in any way. Again, we're not for sure. After all, they did not have their fathers in their lives, which might not have been a good thing. Because remember, the Spartan man was living in the Agoge up until he is 30 years old. Sorry, he got married, but he still lived his life there. So it really seemed like they had a father figure, which is interesting. Anyhow, let's go to the next slide. So we talk about their beauty. Yeah, so Homer describes them as part of the land of the beautiful women. They're known to be the most beautiful women in Greece. Again, we don't have a lot of images of that. There's this one bronze statue to the left that I'm describing, and that gives an idea how she looks. And then there's another one to the right, and that's supposed to be Helena of Troy. So it gives you an idea of their beauty. Now, they would have definitely been attractive in a sense that they had nice bronze skin, right, compared to other girls, because they were out constantly. They were competing and riding horses, so they would have naturally took on a nice bronze color, and they would have been fit. They definitely would have been fit. They would have been not muscular, but they would have not been overweight or anything like that. They would have been nice tone and attractive women in that sense. So it's definitely credible. And one of the things that they wore was a chiton. Hope I pronounced it correctly. And that is, it's a type of a tunic. As you can see, the little bronze statue on the left is wearing one, where one breast is exposed. Now, I'm not sure if always the breast was exposed, maybe in a specific event, like for example, there was a festival of Artemis, I think it was. No, sorry, of Helen. And every year, and then a lot of girls from all over Greece would participate that, and they might have wore an outfit such as that. But again, did they wear it every day like that? It's not clear to me. But that would be something in their wardrobe.
Sergio, a question. So just to pinpoint how strong the women were, and I don't know if you're going to get to that, obviously. One thing, what I've read is, in order for a man to marry a Spartan woman, he has to really possess her, right? So it's not that, you know, he was introduced to anything, that he literally have to almost like wrestle her to marry him. And
well, yeah, I mean, I always use the word, well, the word that I read was kidnapped, right? I think Xenophon describes that they kidnapped these women physically, and that was part of their whole, I mean, mating ritual, if you will. Yes. So that's the reality, and I'll get into that when we discuss the marriage life. But yeah, that's
another point of them being strong. Also, is when Leonidas' wife was sending him to the field, she said, you know, with a shield or on it, you know, and then also giving up their boys at such a young age to Agoge camp would have to make them very strong women, if you think of it. Otherwise they won't survive. I mean, to be that, I mean, we don't know obviously their reaction, but to be that lackadaisic and saying, you know, be on the shield or with it, it's almost like saying,
on with it or on it. Yeah, absolutely. That is a very famous one. There's another story where a Spartan mother is visited by a messenger, right? And the messenger is there to deliver the news that her sons were killed in battle. And she asked the messenger, how's the war going? I said, my lady, your sons have been killed in battle. I said, and then she says, you told me already, did we win the battle or not? And he says, we did. And that's all she cared about. Like, it also, you know, again, emphasizing your point that they have to be strong mentally and emotionally and stuff like that, because there was no room for any of that, obviously.
And the last thing, did they participate in the political life of the Sparta, or there was no,
not politics. They had roles in administration, in that they ran festivals and certain events. I don't think they had office. In fact, I don't even know if the Spartans even had elections. Anybody as an expert on Sparta, please weigh in. But I couldn't find anything that they were necessarily involved in that sense. Now, yes, they did own property, as I'll discuss, and you know, they had rights in that sense of the word, but I don't think they had, like, they were not politically, you know.
I think in the end, I mean, they were more independent because the men were not there, so they have a chance to do things instead of being, you know, waiting for the men to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
I just wanted to add that in all of the Greece in those days, including Sparta, women were not even considered citizens. Only adult males were citizens. You know, they did not vote, but they had what they called apele, where all citizens were gathered and actually were deciding to certain decisions about, you know, they couldn't elect kings or Gerusia. No, Gerusia, I think they did, you know, vote for Gerusia. The kings were inherited position. you know, but only male participating in that.
Okay.
Could I
Thank
add
you.
one final thing? I'm going. Yeah, they were known throughout Greece that, especially on the death, traditionally in most of Greece, the women would ritually weep and wail at death. And there's a story in Xenophon when the Spartans lost the Battle of Leuctra, and the soldiers came home, that the women were weeping whose husbands came home, and that the women just startled, an outsider was there, and he was startled because the women who were weeping were those whose husbands came home, and those who had husbands that died were going around happy and smiling, and it just stuck out to them, that part of the culture.
Part
Yeah.
of husbands.
Sorry, that's awesome.
What husbands they were.
Yeah.
Up until even in Rome, Sergio, women were kidnapped from their families to be married. It was more ritualistic because each family had their own gods that they worshipped. But I wonder if they got the idea out of the Spartans that they had to take the woman away from the family, literally take her away from the family.
We even have the culture of, carrying a woman across the threshold. It is, a phrase that
Yeah, I'm wondering if the
somewhere
Romans figured that out. They loved everything Greek and Spartan, so they may have.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I mean, the famous was it the Sabine women that the Romans
Yes.
captured? Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's a different. That was a battle, and I think that was different. But they did it to. Yes, they captured
Sabine
the
women.
But I
they
do know that
invited
this went on for a long time, and it was actually something that stayed with people even in Italy long into the 20th century. My grandmother told me a story about being taken from her home by her
Well,
husband.
Louisa, they
Sometimes,
still
like, sort of eloping in a weird way, and they would call it like that. They would use a term for it.
they still use that thing in my region, in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. They snatch women, even though the parents know that. But let's say a guy likes a woman, and it doesn't matter if they're socially equal or anything like that. If he steals the woman, that's his woman, even though she doesn't want to marry him.
What do you mean? But what do you mean by steal?
Kidnap her in a
They
sense.
put her on the rug and dump her in the trunk of a car.
Oh my God.
I doubt
That's right.
that. Come on.
No, it's
Louisa,
not.
where is your mother
No, I
from?
believe
It's
the rape.
awful. Louisa,
But I'm just
Louisa?
telling you, my father's family was from just south of Rome, and she used a term that in her dialect that says he took me out, in a sense, it says, of my home. So it's almost like eloping. It's a form of eloping, I think, in a way. I mean, she knew him and she wanted to marry him, but and he wanted to marry her, but it wasn't a marriage, and they would do this. They would actually do this, and I think this stemmed also from poverty. There were peasants. Maybe they couldn't afford a wedding. There was a way to sort of get around that. But she did sell me something on that. It was all very misty. I didn't get a really clear picture of what she was saying, but I remember her using that term, and it was interesting. And then I looked back and I saw that Roman brides were kidnapped out of their homes.
But they also realized that in Italy they had a Muslim influence, because of the Arabic conquest of Sicilia and stuff like that. So it could have also came from the East, because that's what it's been practiced up until these days. That's the weird thing.
But Sabine women, that was a different story, because, and by the way, that happened before even Greece became classical. It's like
that was a
archaic. It's
different
in like
thing.
8th century BC. No, they just didn't have, supposedly in Rome, they practically have no women. And they invited the whole tribe of Sabians to Rome to celebrate, with the purpose to steal their women. And then they just grabbed the women, and they fought a
Yes,
battle
exactly,
and
Greg. Thank you.
expelled the fathers and brothers. So that was the thing. And then later on, when they came back a few years later, the women already had children, and they had to stop it because they figured that their brothers and fathers and their husbands, fathers of their sons, were fighting, so they stopped the battle. So that's the story. But then that was like maybe 8th century BC. We believe that Rome was founded in 753. It was at the time of Romulus.
Yeah, and then we'll get to that. I mean, obviously, we have a presentation on Romulus Ramus. So go ahead, Sergio. Sorry.
No, it's a great point, Greg. And I think another thing I saw, I forgot where I saw it. Mary Beard was talking about it, but just the whole concept of rape is downplayed in the ancient world. And that's probably where that kidnapping might have developed from. Because if you think about Zeus and Poseidon and how they just go after women, whether they're consensual or not, it is kind of like, well, yeah, and they want to be like their gods. So it's probably something that they see as, oh yeah, well, that's part of being a man or something like that. But anyway, just some idea.
Helen's mother was seduced by Zeus, right? Leda, you know, and that's how the Helen
Swan.
seeing a swan, and that's
right.
how the Helen and her sister.
The whole origins of the Trojan War. It was not only abducting Helen, but there had been a back and forth of many women who had been abducted, and that was the causes of the Trojan War, supposedly.
Right. No, that's amazing. All right, Zach, can we do the next slide? Okay, so yeah, everyday life. Like I said, they were not home doing the girl thing. They would have property, some of them, if they inherited, or if they had no older brothers, so the property would go to them. They had to oversee the helots' everyday activity. So the helots were, like, I guess you could say, like serfs in the medieval period. They were in charge of doing the work nobody wanted to do, usually incorporated like agriculture and stuff like that.
Sergio, one question. Homosexuality has been practiced in I guess at least with Greek warriors. We've famous 300 Thebans. We had the lovers that went to war, and we all knew that. Was there any homosexuality, so to speak, between women, or this was just...
Yeah, that's a great question. It's speculative. I could not find any imagery or anything that suggests that. I mean, there was same-sex relationships on both, but I don't think it was the same as it's believed that the male and male relationships were happening. I don't think it's the same. It could have been.
I don't know about Spartan women specifically, but it was very famously the poetess Sappho, who lived on the island of Lesbos in the city of Mytilene, has a school of philosophy for women, where supposedly they practiced the homosexual form of love. Female, there were only females there, and that's why the word lesbian from the island of Lesbos came about, so it was obviously very known in Greece. Sappho lived in the 6th century BC, so it's just about that time, even a little bit before. But I don't know how it was with Spartan women, but certainly the lesbian love was very well known in Greece by that time.
By the way, Greg, just by the fact that you know this is strange, but it's fine.
Well, maybe I'm a lesbian.
Yeah, no, I agree with, and I know about the Lesbos and just the concept of Amazons in general. Yeah, we know that there are societies where we want to believe that they were mostly women with women, but yeah, I would like to know if that was the case in Sparta, but I did not find anything to suggest that. So
I would imagine that it was probably culturally in the ancient world, our concept of sexuality was very different. I mean, they didn't care. There was no such thing as homosexuality. It was just you had a partner, and it was a great looking partner, and that's it. Especially in Rome, they didn't care. But I would imagine that the value of these boys and children in general is so big, and the women have to produce them, right? In the ancient world, there's not a lot of people, that I would imagine that it's frowned upon to be a lesbian because you have to produce children, right? You just said her biggest job was to be a mother, produce children, and especially produce warriors, right? Produce sons. You said a man, I think Aaron told us if they had more than 3 sons, they had more in their life. They were given some kind of premium. It was very important. So I would imagine it might have been frowned upon. And I also look at the idea of Sappho and being on this Lesbos island as interesting as well, because why is she on a specific island with women who are lesbians? Maybe, again, the society might have frowned upon it. I'm just guessing, okay? I'm throwing this out there.
No, no, no.
But
She
you're
was
saying there
she
must
was
be
born
mothers, there
there.
must be children. And in the ancient world, the most dangerous thing, or up until even the 20th century, the most dangerous thing a woman did was produce a child. They died in childbirth probably pretty often. So, that was a big deal. So I would imagine it might have been, maybe that's why there's no imagery, is maybe it was frowned upon. I'm sure it existed. It existed in whatever, it's going to exist.
Well,
But maybe it
certainly
was
male homosexuality was very well practiced very widely.
Right.
Sappho, by the way, was the daughter of King of Middlene, and that's why
Okay.
she
That's why
came
she
to
could afford to have her own.
she came
Okay.
to study in Athens, and then she and also Miletus, and then she no, actually not Athens, Miletus, and then she came back and created her own school. So that's what I don't know about lesbianism, how well it was developed there, but as far as the what they call
That's interesting. I
pederasty,
didn't know that.
it was very common in Sparta, and as a matter of fact, it was very common when an older man at the age of 30 would take a younger man at the age of 15 as his companion. That
Mhm.
usually he trained him, and that usually include love, homosexual love, not necessarily, but often, and it was completely normal on the basis of, and then when this boy grows up into the warrior, they usually fought together. On that basis, in Thebes was a sacred band created, where specifically the friends and lovers were put together, and how they fought in a phalanx is when one guy wear the spear, the other guy had the shield to protect him. And that usually they fought in pairs, and it turned out to be a superior even to Spartan way of fighting. Uh, but the Battle of Leptra is very interesting. I'm sure we'll discuss it. That has a lot to
I
do
just
with
wanted
it.
to emphasize, I think that important point, it wasn't that it was acceptable in Sparta, it was that it was encouraged just for the reason that you mentioned. These were soldiers that had to be in the phalanx. It was just hand in hand with the phalanx, because these are people you grew up with from the age of 7. You knew them very, very well. You would, give your life up for them, and they were literally right up against you, your shoulder to shoulder. And even when they hit 30 and they left the camps, something that hasn't been mentioned yet, they still, every single day until they died, they ate with that same mess group. So these were lifelong relationships. It wasn't, and I think it was actually institutionalized and encouraged because of that phalanx and the need for that kind of, work
Yeah, that's a
together.
great point, Jerry. That's a really great point about the and I forgot to mention that it was this lifelong kind of process until you were 60 and probably beyond that, that because you were still around that camp environment. So it was almost like it was like an extreme Boy Scout troop, for life. And that became, their defense really, and then any offense that they wanted to have as a society.
But this also, and I know you want to get to your next slide, but
No, it's okay.
this whole conversation, these people, the Spartan core of the population, they must have been incredibly valuable, just as societal assets. Number one, the boys, there was a huge amount, not materially, but all of the society was structured to raise them to this point of being 30 years old. And similarly, the women were key because as a gender, they were the procreative gender, and this was a limited gene pool that they were basically carrying forward. So, I assume they lived in a certain part of the Spartan territory. In other words, it wasn't like Spartan Helen in terms of Helot rather, in terms of neighbors. I mean, to have sustained this kind of, self-centric, again, gene pool is kind of amazing over, as you said earlier, 300 or 400 years. That's where I thought you were going, Louisa, when you were saying how valuable how they must have valued children, is that it must have been, I mean, they may have been stoic about it, but it must have been a real loss when one of these people was killed in battle. I mean, you'd much rather have the helots going down right and left. So I just think the demographics of this over 300 or 400 years must have been very interesting, because I think someone said that there was only about 7,000 of them at any given time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that men and women, Aaron, or just
No,
men?
no, no. That was Spartan fighters. So those.
So there would have been older people and younger
Yep.
people. So
Yeah.
maybe do that by a factor of 5.
Yep. Yep.
So
That's probably
maybe
about right.
35,000 for the whole Spartan group.
Yep.
And they wouldn't, like we said, because of infant death, regular death, war death, etc. If they weren't procreating outside of their circle, then that would have stayed relatively static, unless they had huge families. And I don't get any sense of that, because I saw the incentive for over 3 boys that you had on one of the slides.
Yep.
But
and I could tell you the numbers, because at the Battle of Lefkra, and that was very important battle for them, they were able to produce only 8,000 warriors that were Spartans. Sparta was the city, but the whole territory that they had was called Lakemaidon, or Laconia, and that's where the Helots lived, and also Kyriakoi, which didn't have all the rights, but they were kind of free men. They were not like Helots, and they also been create like a big bulk of Spartan army was supplemented by Kyriakois. There were many more of them than Spartans. Spartans themselves mostly lived in Sparta. That's where the training camps. And after they leave the barracks at the age of 30, they were giving piece of land all over the territory, including Messenia, where they were kind of controlling the agricultural produce where Helots worked. But that's all they could have produced, 8,000 of Spartans, and then also Kyriakoi to supplement it.
Mark, what did you say?
Yeah, I had a question for Sergio. My understanding, and I think from another one of these presentations, is that we don't have anything from the Spartans themselves in terms of literature, so that everything that we hear about the Spartans is from Athenians and things like that.
Right.
And my follow-up question is, what kind of cup were you drinking out of, and what was in it?
This is just like a little ceramic.
It looks cool.
Pottery. It's actually, oh, you know what? It's actually a Greek yogurt called Calypso. And I bought this so I can use it for my reenactment roaming group that we do every July.
Okay,
so and I'm just drinking some regular Cabernet, nothing simple.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you for asking. I thought it went well with the Milozomas, even though it was a fake one, but it was, I think, drinking blood, eating a blood meal with wine might work better.
You should have tried Hungarian bull's blood.
What is that?
That is the name of a Hungarian wine, red wine, bull's blood.
What's a wine? Okay. Hungarian's bull blood?
Yep, bull's blood, yep. Yeah, Google it later.
Speaking of wines.
Thanks for the tip, Mark.
There. How do we know what we know?
All right, yeah, Sergio, exactly. You want to?
No, but that's what I said from the beginning. That's the whole idea. Like, we don't, anything that's written about the Spartans is not from the Spartans. So again, there might have been animosity towards them, or there might have been stuff that might have been blown out of proportion, and we hear that all the time from history. So that's why, I thought it was worth discussing that today in this format.
But I think Xenophanes actually admired Spartans, and he lived in Sparta for a period of time, and he is one of the sources that is sympathetic to them.
Who's this?
Xenophanes. Xenophon.
Oh, okay.
The one who,
Yeah, okay,
the
yes.
one who
The
is
March
the
of 10,000, yeah.
and a base.
Yes, Xenophon, yes.
Yeah,
I know him as
he
Xenophon.
lived
Okay,
in
yeah,
Sparta
awesome.
for a long period of time after
Yeah.
his adventures, and he is the one who is one of the sources that is very first of all, he was a witness of their life, and also he was sympathetic.
All right,
Okay.
Sergio,
Awesome.
get on with.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, this is the final one. So the marriage life. I think we discussed a lot about the marriage. I'm just gonna reiterate. So they would marry a little older than the other Greek girls. They had married around 18, which other girls in the Greek city-states were marrying around 14, 15 years old to men around 30. So they married other Greek girls were marrying guys twice their age. Well, the Spartan ones, they married 18, 19 maybe, and to a man that was 30 years old. Now, again, not sure as to why. Again, the Spartan girl was very active. She was out doing athletic things, and they felt like this would make the girl healthy, and a healthy girl would give birth to healthy boys, right? And that kind of makes sense. So that's maybe one of the reasons they married at such a late age. But to Luisa's point, childbirth was very dangerous in general. So maybe they thought it was better if they married at a later age, but we don't know. Yes, they did live separately from each other. Again, that strange ritual where a man, okay, so one of the marriage ceremonies was he kidnapped the woman, okay? And he then would cut her hair off. I'm not sure if they shaved it skin bald or they cut it short, but it cut it to the point where it was like more masculine than feminine, from my understanding. And then they would put her wearing a male tunic, okay? Which would have been a peplos, I think. Yeah, a peplos. So again, they would take their wives, dress them up a certain way, and then have a very unusual relationship. What Marika was explaining earlier, it's not something that we're used to. I'm not used to that for sure. Where they would just, all right, I'm gonna go and hang out with the boys in the barracks, and then when it's time to, get with my lady, I'm gonna just go in the dark middle of the night when no one's watching, and I'm gonna just, procreate and then go back and hopefully nobody notices. So that's kind of like what the marriage life was for a Spartan woman, for the most part, which is, yes, very, very unusual. Even I would even imagine in Greece that might have been looked like we just said earlier, that homosexuality was nothing of a shocker. It wasn't anything of a stigma, and that we agree with. But this marriage, I don't think I've ever seen anything or read anything like this in any culture throughout history, where a man kind of like goes away and then sneaks. It's I don't know. It's kind of strange, but that's what they did. Yes. Oh yeah. So then polyandry. Again, that makes sense because, well, if the men's are away, if their husbands are away and sex is needed, I guess they're going to look for other means of that. So yes, it's very possible they might have even taken on, if not other husbands, other lovers. Xenophon mentions that there's no law against adultery in Sparta compared to Athens. So therefore, you could have an affair and you would not be penalized. So it's very likely that was the case. And again, the husbands probably didn't mind. It's probably something like, just I have to have children. My main role in society is to be a soldier as a man, and for a woman, my main role in society is to have children, to make more soldiers. And that's pretty much what it was. It was very mechanical. So there's another story where, not story, but a written account where older men, there's an older guy, he would lend his wife out to younger men so that they could, have children. Of course, that children will belong to the older man's house. But it was very open in that way.
Very
so,
sure.
Yeah.
But I think because the fathers didn't live with the kids, so there was not that idea that the father wants to be sure that the kid is his. It's not from a Helios.
Oh, yeah.
So because the kids were part of the state, they were not part of his, whatever. So I guess that's
right.
Didn't care much.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point because yeah, and compared to other times in other societies, yes, whatever your father had, you would be an heir to that, and so there would be all this, you know, confusion and who's my biological son or daughter and who's not. So yeah, that could have been a whole, you know, mess in itself.
You know, after the year 3030, they were released from barracks, and they did live with their wives. They were given a plot of land and with ilots, and that's where they lived with their wives. So it's not exactly, if they had a kid before 30, which was not that often because they were encouraged to marry at 30 after they finished.
But what I understood that they got married at 30.
Yes, they would get married at 30. Maybe they had kids before, but usually if they had kids after 30, after they get married, you know, they would live in a family. They would go for wars, of course, often, but they were not living in barracks all the time.
But the kid is not so important because they know that the kid is going to be away when he's 7 years old.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. He would be
It's not
away living in
inheritance,
gangs.
it's not, yeah. And I think also about the lesbians, I think was more kind of underground maybe because first women were not that important, so nobody will tell so many stories about the women. And also because maybe the men will feel kind of threatened that the women are having fun without them, you know, that they don't need them. The only thing that they need them is for procreation. But if procreation was the most important thing, that's fine, that's what the men are. But to have fun, you can have someone else.
I don't know. I think that's kind of a modern take on that. I think the women were must have been very important. And, you know, again, I'm beginning to get the sense from, I'm learning today that we know Sparta for all its militarism, but it seems to me they're more remarkable for this population dynamics experiment that they carried on. And women in that would have been extremely important, you know, women of the proper bloodlines, Spartan bloodlines. And as for, you know, whatever their pleasures were, I mean, I'm sure that was, you know, within the range of normal human activity, and how, you know, you can engage in a number of pleasures that have nothing to do with procreation per se, and still engage in your procreative duties, i.e. produce children, etc. But it sounds like, with the exception of the ecclesia that you mentioned regarding military matters, women were pretty full participants in the Spartan social structure. They owned property, they ran the farms, they had the children, they were encouraged to be physically active. I mean, it's, you know, so I don't take a read that as you were just describing it at all with regard to Spartan gender roles.
Could I add something to what Anne just said? And that's the importance of women, firstly, in terms of just procreation, and you were talking about the population. There was a law in Sparta that said you couldn't put a name on a tomb unless the person had been killed in battle. The only other exception was a woman who died in childbirth had her name put on the tomb. So you can see, you know, just the cultural encouragement in those terms and the importance, I think, in some ways of women. And the other thing is the things that I've seen and read, all the Greeks and Romans and everybody else, it astounded them, the power of women in the Spartan state. And Aristotle has, I remember reading something there, you know, he called it a gynecrocracy. He thought that the women actually ran the country. And there are many stories, like in Herodotus, about Gorgos, who was the daughter of Cleomenes, one of the early kings, and how she affected affairs of state. There's two stories in there. One of them where somebody comes in, I can't remember where it was from, but he wanted the Spartans to help them in the Ionian revolt. And at first, Cleomenes says, no way, we don't have a navy, blah, blah, blah. And the other person goes to bribe him. And Gorgos' daughter says, hey, you better go away, father. You shouldn't be taking bribes. And then later she ends up marrying Leonidas. And there's a story in there where she decodes, somebody comes in with this secret, it appears to be a blank slate or something. And she figures out that this wax surface, and she rubs away the wax, and there's a message saying that Xerxes or that the Persians are going to invade. So just from many, many different sources, it astounded, as I said, most of the cultures afterwards, the importance of women, and how, as opposed to other Greek states, the women were actually a very important part of politics and everything else.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I agree with that. And
Thank you, Jerry. I think that was because they had to run the farms and everybody had to eat. These guys were in war all the time. They were constantly.
Yeah, I was gonna make that point, Louisa. Exactly. Like people might say, oh, you know what? Spartans were ahead of their time. They believe in feminism. They believe in equality, and that might not necessarily been the case. They might have been realized, okay, we have to compromise. This is a sacrifice. If we're gonna be out training 24/7 for battle, someone's got to run the show. So why not our sisters and our mothers? And that's kind of where it's at. So my question to the ladies in the group: what do you think about a Spartan woman versus an Athenian woman? And what do you think would be, what would you choose if you had to choose one? And that'll be my ending point. Neither, right?
I don't
know.
No, I think you're right. The Spartan women had more rights. The Spartan
I think they had a more free life. If I had to choose, you're going to make me choose, I would have been a Spartan woman only because he's away all the time.
That's for sure.
Have a more free
Then
life.
you know that your kid is going to be taken away.
So hold on. You guys like polygamy? What's going on here?
No. Zach, I'm married 32 years to the same guy. No.
Okay. No
what do you
way.
call it?
Yeah.
No. Yeah. What I mean is, it looks like her life was a little more self-determined in some odd ways, because she would have run the farm. She was on her own. She raised these little boys to a certain age. Neither life was great, I'm sure. But as they said, the Spartan woman had a better life, more freedom in some sense. They did own property. They owned 50% of all the property. That had to give them some power. They owned the land. So, it must have been maybe a little better to be a Spartan woman. I don't know.
Well, I think it's like you could turn, you could turn the question around to you guys and say, which would you have rather been, Spartan male or Greek male? I'm not sure.
Certainly Athens.
Yeah.
I don't want to be. I would never want to be a Spartan man.
No, great.
No, I would be an Athens.
Too much work.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, and then
they would have got rid of me at birth. They would have tossed me over the mountain.
Same here. I'm stuck on the hill.
That's what I was thinking about myself as a woman too. I'm not sure, it might have been a more self-determined life, but I'm not sure I could raise to that athletic standard by any means.
Yeah.
I have, I don't know, on a slightly different, just a question, and that's really the role of the heelot. This idea of slavery, it's actually very different than the slavery everywhere. But in Sparta, again, the slaves were owned by the state. They weren't owned by the individual. So they were the pieces of land, and they were assigned to those, and then the Spartan citizens were assigned to that. Whereas the slaves in other parts of Greece, they had a farmer, and he might have a couple of slaves that worked alongside with him. So it's a different thing, and their fear, as somebody pointed out, like every year they would renew the war against the helots. Their fear, they were outnumbered by 7-1. So to what degree is this whole culture a result of that, whether it was a choice or whatever, of having slavery? And to some degree, it's sort of like the southern United States, where you had, in other countries too, in Brazil and in Haiti, where the slaves outnumbered, the slave owners by 10-1. And like in the South, you had that military aristocracy, Colonel Sanders kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, to what degree are they sort of the victims of the slavery in a way, that this whole culture got built
Absolutely.
from that?
It's all
absolutely.
because of this that they became militaristic society to control the population. That's the whole idea. That's happened after Mycenaean Wars. You know, that's why it's so unique that you know, they chose to make all those Mycenaeans not a full citizens or half citizens, but just put them on the level of slaves, and then they had to control them. And that's the only reason why they became a militaristic society to that extent.
And there was no upward mobility. It wasn't like a Roman citizen where you could come from somewhere and become a Roman citizen. You had a chance. You could become a Roman citizen. So there was sort of a way to that. There was a path to that, but no, not in that society. So yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, guys, I have to be somewhere at 2:30, but I want to thank everybody.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you, Sergio.
Sergio, this was amazing. Oh my God. Sergio, Aaron, you guys.
Aaron,
You killed it, bro. You killed it.
Yeah, no,
Can I
great
get
job,
your
Sergio.
recipe?
That was awesome.
Well, before
All
Sergio
right.
drops out, I want to talk about the upcoming schedule.
Okay.
If you guys don't mind.
Actually, I have a couple of questions. Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted.
Yeah, go
Can
ahead.
you
Go
both hear
ahead.
me?
Who is that?
Yeah.
Carolyn?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. By the way,
Hi,
can you quickly introduce yourself? You're new to our group.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to join late today, so my apologies. And thank you for these excellent presentations and discussion. My name's Carolyn. I know Greg from the Russian literature book group. And he told me about this group, and as Greg knows, I'm writing a story set in Sparta, and so I was very interested in this topic. I have two quick questions. One, going back to the conversation around the women that I would love to ask. So the Spartan men, when they turned 30, the Spartiates, when they turned 30, they would get property. That was all over Laconia, right? But the Agoge and the center of everything was in Sparta. I'm curious where the women lived. Would the Spartiate wives live in Sparta, or would they live out on the properties that the families were granted, and then or inherited? And then the second question I have is, I'm very curious about who were the priests? What part of the population did the priests at the temples come from?
As for the women, I can definitely say that they lived once after 30. The men were released from the barracks and they were given a land with ilots. The women would live with them, and it would be not just in Laconia but also Mycenae, which was part of the whole territory. As for the priesthood, I'm not so sure. It wasn't that much developed.
The women, Greg, the women definitely had a role in the priesthood. In fact, I think somebody mentioned, I think it was Jerry, you said about the tombstones. And one of the things that's highly debated is that whether or not the women that died at childbirth were the only other ones that received tombstones in addition to the men who fought in battle, or was it just women that served in the priesthood? I read that somewhere. So women did have a role in the priesthood, as far as we know.
There were also, as far as, I don't know if they were women or men, but the king assigned people to visit the oracles. And I think that and I think they may have been women also involved in that, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Well,
thanks, everyone.
Before you move on, there was a famous movie 300, and when Leonidas went to visit the oracle, he had oracle had a woman that would reach a hallucination state and would give him premonitions, and that's probably one of the I think they were almost like bestalkers, which were virgin women. They were used and drugged, and in hallucination state they would tell them what their premonition is, and they would and they told Leonidas the king has to die for the empire to live, something like this, and that was the involvement, I guess. And if everybody knows who Bestalkers was, they were the virgins that kept the fire in Rome.
Yeah, the Vestal Virgins and the Oracle of Delphi was famous, and they figured out that there was some kind of there's a cave there or something, and it was a hallucinatory effect. And this oracle would tell them just what you're saying, Zach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So the
I
Vestals
was-
kept the fire burning. That's a keep the fire burning. The Vestal Virgins.
There was a cult of Helen also that apparently was very popular in that region, and not so popular in other parts. And there's some story about where I can't remember who it is, but one of the mothers brings her newborn child in there, and she thinks the child is kind of ugly, a woman, a girl, and she prays to Helen to